There is a section of Shiloh that has not been touched. Not because archaeologists lost interest, not because the funding ran out, but because what the ground-penetrating scans revealed beneath that specific area created a debate so intense, so politically charged, and so theologically loaded that the decision of whether to dig has been taken out of the hands of the scientists entirely. Something is down there. The radar confirmed it. And what happens next may not be up to the researchers at all. This section reestablishes the proven findings from the original excavation before introducing the GPR scanning story. It reminds the audience what has already been confirmed, building credibility before we push into new territory. Most people never heard of Shiloh before the excavation reports started circulating. It sits on a quiet hill in the heart of Israel. No crowds, no famous skyline. Just ancient stone, dry air, and a silence that feels older than it should. But beneath that silence, something had been waiting. When the Associates for Biblical Research returned to Shiloh for their most recent excavation phases, they were not expecting what they found. A massive stone platform cut directly into the bedrock. Animal bones arranged in patterns that matched ritual sacrifice under Mosaic law. Storage vessels buried in a hurry. A thick destruction layer timed precisely to the moment the Bible says the Philistines drove Israel to its knees. Each one of those findings, on its own, is significant. Together, they form something harder to dismiss. A pattern that points directly at the biblical account of Shiloh as the home of the Tabernacle and the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant for over 300 years. But here is what most reports left out. The excavation team did not just dig, they scanned. Ground-penetrating radar was deployed across the site, sending pulses down through layers of soil, ash, and limestone bedrock. The surface findings were extraordinary, but the scans were looking deeper than any trowel had gone. And what came back in that data was not what anyone had prepared for. The surface of Shiloh had already rewritten the conversation, but the subsurface data was about to blow it wide open. Because sitting beneath the already remarkable findings, beneath the platform, beneath the destruction layer, beneath everything the team had already documented, the radar detected something else entirely. Something sealed, something geometric, something that had no business being there if Shiloh was just an ancient village. And that is where the debate started. And that is where it has stayed ever since. Before we talk about what the radar found, it is worth understanding what ground-penetrating radar actually does. Because this is not science fiction. This is not speculation. This is a technology that has been used for decades across some of the most significant archaeological sites on Earth. Here is how it works. A radar unit is pulled slowly across the ground surface. It sends electromagnetic pulses straight down through the soil. Those pulses travel through different materials at different speeds. When they hit something solid, something hollow, something that does not match the surrounding material, they bounce back. The unit records those reflections. Software then builds a picture of what is underneath, layer by layer, meter by meter. It cannot tell you what color something is. It cannot read inscriptions. But it can tell you with remarkable accuracy that something is there. It can tell you the shape, the depth, the density, and critically, it can tell you whether that something is natural or man-made. Natural rock formations are irregular. They curve and shift and follow no particular logic. But man-made structures are different. They have corners. They have consistent spacing. They have geometry. And that is exactly what the scans at Shiloh returned. Right angles, consistent wall thicknesses, voids that repeated in patterns no natural limestone formation produces, sitting at a depth that placed them below every layer of known occupation, below the destruction layer, below the platform, below everything the team had already documented on the surface. The radar was not picking up random underground noise. It was picking up structure, deliberate, precise, ancient. And when the researchers overlaid the scan data onto the known footprint of the excavated site, the geometry of those underground voids aligned with something that made the room go very quiet. What they aligned with is the part nobody saw coming. And it starts with a measurement that should not exist, this deep underground. In archaeology, measurements matter more than almost anything else. A wall that curves tells one story. A wall that runs perfectly straight for 12 meters tells a completely different one. And when multiple walls meet at precise right angles, forming deliberate enclosed spaces, that is not nature, that is intention. The subsurface data from Shiloh showed intention. When researchers began mapping the underground voids detected by the radar, they were not looking at random hollow spaces in the rock. They were looking at a series of enclosed rectangular chambers, consistent wall thicknesses, uniform spacing, a layout that repeated with the kind of regularity you only see when something was deliberately designed. But here is where it gets complicated. The dimensions of those chambers did not match anything found at comparable ancient sites in the region. They did not match standard Canaanite storage structures. They did not match residential layouts. They did not match anything from the known architectural vocabulary of the ancient Near East. What they did match was something else entirely. Researchers familiar with the biblical text of Exodus began running comparisons. The tabernacle described in those ancient records was not a vague spiritual concept. It was a structure with precise measurements, specific ratios, defined zones, an outer court, an inner sanctuary, and at the very center, a chamber described as the dwelling place of God Himself. When those biblical measurements were converted into modern units and laid against the radar data from Shiloh, the proportions held. Not perfectly. Nothing survives 3,000 years perfectly. But the ratios were consistent in a way that went beyond coincidence. The outer dimensions matched the inner dimensions, matched the spacing between structural elements. Matched. The team sat with that data for a long time, before anyone said anything out loud. Because if those chambers beneath Shiloh's bedrock follow the same geometric logic as the tabernacle blueprint, then what exactly are they looking at down there? And more importantly, what might still be inside them? That question was about to get a great deal more serious. Here is something that rarely makes it into the mainstream reports about Shiloh. The radar scans did not just detect chambers. They detected boundaries. Specific points within the subsurface map where the signal returned something unusual. Dense, uniform, deliberately placed, not rock, not soil, not the kind of irregular material you find when a structure simply collapses over centuries. These boundaries behaved like sealed barriers, solid, consistent, and positioned at the entry points of the largest detected chambers. In simple terms, the radar data suggests these chambers are not open, they are not collapsed, they are not filled with debris. They appear to be sealed, intact, closed from the inside or the outside by something dense enough to reflect the radar signal the way a solid constructed barrier would. Now, sealed underground chambers at an ancient religious site are not automatically extraordinary. Tombs get sealed, storage areas get blocked, structures collapse and fill. These things happen, but the location of these sealed points changes the conversation entirely. They sit directly beneath the area identified through surface excavation as the central zone of the ancient sanctuary. The place where the stone platform was found. The place where the ritual bones were concentrated. The place where every indicator on the surface points to the holiest section of whatever stood at Shiloh 3,000 years ago. Sealed chambers, directly beneath the Holy of Holies footprint. Intact, undisturbed, waiting. And here is the part that stops researchers cold. There are no looter tunnels. In virtually every ancient site of significant religious or cultural value across the Middle East, looters got there first. Tunnel systems, broken entry points, disturbed soil signatures. The radar picks all of that up. At Shiloh, beneath the central sanctuary zone, there is none of that. The subsurface shows no evidence of post-occupation intrusion. Whatever is in those chambers has not been touched since they were sealed. The question that follows from that is the one that nobody in the research community can quite bring themselves to answer out loud yet. Ground-penetrating radar is one tool, but it is not the only tool researchers have been using at Shiloh. Alongside the radar surveys, the team deployed magnetometry, a technology that measures subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried materials. Different materials disturb that field differently. Iron disturbs it one way, fired clay another way, dense organic material another way entirely, and certain metals produce signatures that are remarkably distinct. The magnetometry data from the area above the sealed subsurface chambers returned anomalies, concentrated ones, sitting in a spatial pattern that corresponded directly with the largest of the detected voids. The signal was not the scattered, irregular pattern you get from random metallic debris in the soil. It was concentrated, bounded, as if whatever was producing it was contained within a defined space. Researchers were careful in how they described this publicly. They did not use the word gold. They did not claim to have identified a specific material. What they said was that the anomaly signatures were consistent with a high-density, non-ferrous metallic concentration located within the sealed chamber zone. Non-ferrous, high-density, contained, sealed. The biblical description of the Ark of the Covenant is specific about its construction. Acacia wood overlaid entirely with pure gold, a gold cover, gold rings, gold carried on gold. It was not a small amount of metal. It was a significant, concentrated mass of one of the densest and most electromagnetically distinct materials that exists. Nobody on the research team is claiming the magnetometry data proves the Ark is down there. That would be a leap far beyond what the evidence currently supports, and every serious researcher knows it. But what they are saying is this: the data is not inconsistent with that possibility. And in the careful, measured language of academic archaeology, that statement carries enormous weight. Because there is a significant difference between "we found nothing" and "we found something we cannot yet explain." At Shiloh right now, the data sits firmly in that second category, and it is getting harder to ignore with every new scan. Here is where the story stops being purely archaeological. Because when word of the subsurface findings began circulating within the research community, something happened that had nothing to do with science. A wall went up, not a physical wall, a bureaucratic one, a political one, a wall built from competing interests, religious sensitivities, and geopolitical pressures that have been building in the region for decades. Shiloh sits in the West Bank. That geographical reality alone makes every decision about the site extraordinarily complicated. Archaeological work there does not operate in a vacuum. It operates inside one of the most contested political landscapes on the planet. Every trowel that goes into that ground carries implications that extend far beyond academic research. When the subsurface data suggested the presence of intact sealed chambers beneath the sanctuary zone, multiple parties took notice simultaneously. Israeli religious authorities, Palestinian cultural heritage organizations, international archaeological bodies, and certain religious groups whose interest in what might lie beneath Shiloh goes well beyond academic curiosity. The debate that followed was not quiet. Questions were raised about who has the authority to authorize further excavation, who owns the findings if something significant is recovered, what the implications are for the broader political situation in the region if a discovery of this magnitude is confirmed. And underneath all of those legitimate procedural questions sits a harder one that nobody wants to say directly. If those chambers are opened, and what the radar data suggests is confirmed, the religious and political shockwave would not stay contained to a research paper. It would not stay contained to the archaeological community. It would move through every major world religion that traces its roots to the God of Abraham. It would land in governments, in international bodies, in the streets. The researchers who want to dig further understand this. The authorities overseeing the site understand this. And that understanding is precisely why the sealed chambers of Shiloh remain sealed. Not because nobody knows they are there, but because everyone does. And nobody can agree on what happens the moment they are opened. Step back from the radar data for a moment. Step back from the politics, and look at the timeline. Because the timeline at Shiloh is telling a story that the subsurface findings are now beginning to confirm in ways that change the entire archaeological conversation around early Israelite history. The biblical account places the tabernacle at Shiloh for approximately 369 years, from the time of Joshua through the period of the Judges and into the early monarchy. That is not a brief occupation. That is nearly 4 centuries of continuous religious activity concentrated on one specific hill in the central highlands of ancient Canaan. For that length of time, a permanent supporting infrastructure would have been necessary. You do not maintain a national religious sanctuary for 3.5 centuries using only surface structures. You build foundations. You cut into bedrock. You create permanent underground supports for the structures above. That is standard ancient construction practice across the entire region. The Egyptians did it. The Assyrians did it. Every major ancient civilization that built permanent religious structures built them with significant subsurface foundations. The question was never really whether Shiloh had subsurface structures. The question was what those structures looked like, and whether anything remained inside them after 3,000 years of history rolled over that hill. And the radar data is now suggesting that the answer to that second question is yes. The destruction layer found on the surface dates to the Philistine conflict. That event was violent and sudden. The biblical account in 1 Samuel describes a rapid military defeat. The ark was taken in the chaos. The sanctuary was abandoned. And then Shiloh fell. Rapid, sudden, violent. That kind of event does not give people time to empty underground chambers. It does not give priests time to carefully remove and relocate everything stored beneath the sanctuary floor. It gives them time to run. And if they ran, then what was stored beneath Shiloh 3,000 years ago may still be exactly where they left it. That thought is what keeps the research team coming back. There is one more piece of evidence that has not received the attention it deserves. In the most recent excavation season at Shiloh, the team recovered a small fragment bearing what appears to be early Hebrew script. The fragment was found in the destruction layer, burned, damaged, but legible enough to send for formal epigraphic analysis. The research team has been careful about what they say publicly regarding this fragment. They have confirmed it exists. They have confirmed it is under analysis. They have not confirmed what it says. But here is what that fragment represents, regardless of its specific content. Inscriptions from this period of Israelite history are extraordinarily rare. The ancient Israelites did not carve lengthy administrative records into stone, the way the Egyptians or Assyrians did. Written material from this era is scarce, which means that every fragment recovered carries disproportionate historical weight. If that inscription dates to the period of active use at Shiloh, it was written by someone who was there, someone who walked that ground when the tabernacle was standing, someone who served in that sanctuary, or recorded something about it during its operational lifetime. And if the content of that inscription relates in any way to the structure of the sanctuary, to the chambers beneath it, or to what was stored there, it would represent the first direct written evidence from inside the Shiloh sanctuary itself, not a later account. Not a historian writing centuries after the fact. A contemporary record. From the ground. From the time. The analysis is ongoing. The results have not been published. And the research team has said only that, if the initial examination is confirmed, it would rank among the most significant epigraphic finds ever recovered from an Israelite site. Those are not the words researchers use casually. Those are the words researchers use when they are sitting on something that has not yet been fully processed, something that has not yet been cleared for public release, something that someone, somewhere, may not want the world to read. So here is where everything stands right now. Beneath the hill at Shiloh, ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry surveys have identified a network of subsurface chambers, geometric, sealed, sitting directly beneath the footprint of the ancient sanctuary, showing electromagnetic anomalies consistent with dense metallic concentrations, showing no evidence of looting or post-occupation intrusion. On the surface above those chambers, archaeologists have already confirmed a stone platform consistent with the tabernacle layout, ritual animal remains, deliberately buried storage vessels, a destruction layer timed to one of the most dramatic moments in biblical history, and a written inscription currently under analysis that may or may not tell us exactly what was stored on that ground. The physical evidence points in one direction. The radar data points in one direction. The historical timeline points in one direction. And yet, those chambers remain sealed, because the decision to open them is not a scientific decision anymore. It is a political decision, a religious decision, a decision with consequences that extend far beyond the boundaries of a single archaeological site on a quiet hill in the West Bank. The researchers want to dig. The technology exists to do it carefully and responsibly. The evidence justifies it. But the approvals required involve layers of authority that answer to interests far larger than academic curiosity. What sits at the center of all of this is a question that has been unanswered for 3,000 years. A question that an entire field of archaeology, an entire tradition of biblical scholarship, and an entire community of faith has been circling for generations. Is the Ark still there? The radar says something is. The magnetometry says something dense and metallic is sealed in those chambers. The timeline says nobody had time to remove it. And the inscription may say something nobody is ready to hear yet. The ground at Shiloh is no longer staying quiet. The only question left is whether anyone is ready for what it is about to say. No traditional outro. No visible conclusion. Ends mid-tension. The excavation schedule for the next season at Shiloh is already being planned. The team is going back. The scans are being refined with newer technology that can penetrate deeper and return sharper data than anything used before. And somewhere in a laboratory, the epigraphic analysis of that burned inscription fragment is still running. Word from the team is that the results are close. That a publication may be coming sooner than expected. What that inscription says has not been released. What the deeper scans will show has not yet been captured. What sits inside those sealed chambers has not been confirmed. But three things are true right now that were not true 5 years ago. The chambers are real. The radar confirmed them. The sealed boundaries are real. The magnetometry confirmed them. And the surface evidence connecting this specific ground to the most sacred object ever described in human history is stronger today than it has ever been. Somewhere beneath that quiet hill in Israel, behind sealed stone that has not been disturbed in 3,000 years, something is waiting. The inscription may tell us exactly what it is. And when that analysis is released, nothing about this conversation is going to look the same.